It's another episode of the Next Fix podcast where we dig into comeback stories. It's what we all want to hear, right? Success stories, sure, they're cool, but comeback stories is what the human condition yearns for, right? And so that's what we have here in Devin Fish. He's an author. You know, I'm a big fan of authors. Anybody that's got enough courage to put it in a book, I'm a fan of. So, Devin, I want you to tell me how you living, brother. How's things on your end?
Yeah, so right now I'm still currently a career counselor, so I'm not a veteran yet. And so I get out in May 5th. That will be my 10 years of service. So just to throw it out there, I am 28 years old. Most people think I'm still in high school, so I always have to tell people.
Sure.
And so that's kind of, where some of the troubles began. Well, some was good, some was bad at the time. But
Yeah.
to get in my background, so I came from like poverty. So I come from a small city, Rockford, Illinois. So to give you an idea of that city, so on the safe scale, we're rated like 5 out of 100. So that means
Well, hold on a
95.
second.
Yep.
Hold on a second, Devin. All right. You jumped right in, and I'm usually the one that jumps right in, but that's all good,
Gotcha.
brother. So, you're raised in Rockford, Illinois,
Mhm.
right? And so, what you're explaining here is right. It's some meager beginnings, or at least some challenges as far as your environment, right? But I don't know. I don't know what that safe scale is. What the heck is that? What you said? 5 out of
Yeah.
100. What
So
does
the
that
safe
mean?
scale, so essentially what it means is like 5 out of 100 means like 95% of the United States is safer than Rock.
My God. Wait, hold
Yes.
on a second.
Yeah.
Hold on a second. Let's try to. I gotta wrap my head around this thing. Oh, 5 out of 100 on the safety scale it's implying, right? It's calculation that the city that you were raised in, 95% of all of the other places to live in the US are a safer place to live.
Yep, that is
Wow.
correct. So, like, the only few
Okay.
people that beat us are, like, Detroit, so, like, Michigan, and then, like, even Chicago. So even Chicago, which is, like, an hour away from Rockford, it's also, like, a 5 out of 100. So that'll give you kinda like a base to go off of.
I did not know that it was. I've been to Chicago, but yeah, visiting a place never gives you the full picture. So, okay. So, all right. Yeah. It's not like you chose to live there. This is where you're being raised, right? And so,
Yes.
and this is kind of where things started developing for you. You know, you wrote a book, man. So, like, where were the rock bottom moments? Like, what was those times where you didn't think it could get any worse?
Yeah, so chapter 1, I start describing that. So, like, normally I give the background, like, "Hey, this is what Rockford is. This is why I don't really go back there." Then I start going into poverty. Well, really, my rock bottom, it was, like, adding up, like, 21 years, from the time, I was 8 all the way up to 21. So poverty-wise, like, I moved, like, 16 times before I was at the age of 18. So there's a lot of that. Um,
Yeah.
Plus, wasn't a great city to start with. Like, I went to 7 different schools during that time period. So I went to, like, 2 elementary schools, I went to 4 middle schools, and then 1 high school. Like, living conditions weren't always great. So, like, there was one time where I didn't have, like, AC. Sometimes we wouldn't have, like, hot water. And, like, even one time we didn't have, like, a toilet for, like, a couple weeks. And then to include, like, people who housed me, so I've, like, lived with my father, I live with my mother, I live with grandparents, I live with, like, aunts, and then I've also, like, lived with, like, friends of family. And then to break that down even more, I've lived in, like, houses, apartments, other parks, farms, and, like, all the way down to a motel. So that's, a little bit of the background. For people who don't know me, like, in person, I'm a pretty shy person. My last name is Fish, so I was pretty easily picked on as a kid. I'm about 5'8", 5'10", depending on how you measure it. And then from there, I was like
I'll give you 5.
130
I'll give you
pounds.
5'10",
Yeah,
brother. I'll give you 5'10". Let's do it.
yeah. And so I was
All
like
right.
130 pounds. So I was like one of the easiest kids to pick on, like, all throughout those schools. And then, like, being inconsistent, going back and forth to like 7 different schools. So it's like I just, I was always like a very silent kid from that point on.
Sure. Well, I wanna ask you, Devin, it's a tough environment, but, was there anything specific about, I don't know, the family picture? I mean, was there struggles, or was it just you didn't have, enough resources to get out? I mean, was there any other kind of, circumstances influencing you staying in that environment?
So really the first chance I got, I left immediately, which was when I turned 18. In 2016, like a month after I graduated high school, I was already joining the military. There was a couple significant events like right before that. So I can go into the story about my father.
Yeah.
So it was pretty much 2016, got off the bus from school. I was getting ready to graduate high school and then I was getting ready to join the army at the same time. So got off that bus, looked off to the side, and our apartment was swarmed by police vehicles. So there's like 10 police vehicles outside the apartment. Now it was a big apartment, like 20, 30 rooms, but I got off that bus, took a pause, and I'm like, I'm not about to have a very good day, am I? Walked up to the police cars. They're like, hey, even my apartment number, they're like, you're not allowed to go in there. Like, we don't want you in there. We don't want you to see what just happened. And so I was escorted to my aunt's, which was like a mile or two down the road. So they get the warrant over to my aunt. They're like, hey, father's in the hospital. And then they're also like, hey, he resisted arrest. He got tased and then he got sedated and put in the hospital.
Yeah.
So we went to that hospital, saw him. So pretty much what we saw was that he was handcuffed to the bedpost, and then like his arms were like covered in scratches and like blood.
Yeah.
Because he was sedated, he couldn't really talk. But when we got there, they kind of told us the situation, and they're like, "Hey, he had Fireball and cocaine in his system." So essentially, what happened is like he just went nuts with like all the adrenaline going in his system.
Yeah.
And then, we couldn't really talk to him. He didn't really want to be around us either because he saw me and he's like trying to turn away. No one wants to see their son in that kind of position. So then I also had to go get my stuff. So we had to go back to that apartment, after the crime scene. We went in that apartment and we discovered, why his arm was covered in blood is because he destroyed everything in the apartment. And
Yeah.
so what I imagine he destroyed first was we had a glass table at the center, and so
Yeah.
pretty much what happened is he shattered that glass table and then the entire apartment was covered in blood from like all the scratches and going crazy. So like he broke the refrigerator, the TVs, laptops, tables, everything like that. And we even had like a AC vent that was like hooked into the wall. So he threw it through the window. And so it
Wow.
created a huge scene.
Wow, man. And so, well, that answers that. I figured it was something, sketchy, right? And so, yeah, some cocaine and some Fireball. If you're pairing those two up, right? That's a pretty nasty combination. But now you got off of that bus and you've got your ticket out already, right? And so, I am curious. You said you haven't been back to that town. I mean, do you talk to your parents or do you talk to your family, or are you just like, were you just trying to get out and that was the end of that?
So I go back normally about once a year, strictly to see family. I do talk to my father still, so we do have a pretty good relationship. I've showed him the stories. He's aware of everything. He's like, "Hey, I'm glad you're doing a lot better than me. Proud of you. Yeah, keep doing what you're doing." So he is doing a lot better. So he got off the drugs. He's been sober also for like 3 years. So he's doing his own journey as well. So that was a bit positive, but it took a while
Yeah,
to get there.
dude. Well, hey, listen, man. All right, I have a similar. My parents both addicts, both alcoholics, and so
Mhm.
one's sober, one's not, and so it's tough, man. It doesn't put you in an advantageous spot, does it? Right? Like it's about the biggest disadvantage you could have. So all right, you made a decision to get into the military. Now, you know, I guess I'm gonna go out on a limb here, and that wasn't the only time things got tough for you. Am I right?
Yep. So that is correct. So I wasn't a very good kid in school. So my father was already going through issues. So like for example, like there's one time he got a phone call from my school. He's like, "Hey, he's missing like 50 assignments in one class." And so like I was already failing out of my classes. Because like if you can tell about my background, I was like, I don't really care right now. And I was already diving into like self-hatred and the city was taking a toll on me and everything like that. So that's kind of where it went from there. I was already so the army was kind of like an escape at that point, and then at the same time, the previous year I'd failed like one of my classes, and my father didn't take that so well. So he's like kept forcing me to try to get a job. He's like, "You're going to work this school off and stuff like that," and that was like a year going on. And eventually, he's like, "Have you thought about joining the army?" So I'm like, "Sure." He just had enough, got the keys, drove down to the office. We talked about him, and I'm like, I got to get him off my back. So I'm like, talk to the recruiter, and it ended up working actually really well.
Yeah.
Not at the start, which was, I guess, where I'll go next. Well, He got out of the hospital, we talked a little bit, and then I went off to boot camp. So I originally joined the Army to be a 68 Charlie, which is a nurse.
Okay.
Yep. So got to boot camp, failed my first cycle through because I missed one shot during like rifle marksmanship. So it's like a mandatory event you have to pass. All right. And boot camp is like roughly, I think it's 2 to 3 months, something like that. Not a very fun experience. You're waking up, before the sun's out and you're going to sleep when the sun, is up back again.
Yeah.
So failed that. So I had to go through a second cycle. Then I passed the second cycle. So never failed rifle marksmanship after that.
Nice.
So then I went to 68 Charlie school. About 5 weeks in, I get to 68 Charlie school. I fail out of the course. Yep. So already, within like 6 months of Army, I've already failed like 2 schools already. So by that time, how that works is I had to wait for my next class to go somewhere else. So like once you fail school in the Army, they're just going to send you somewhere else. You don't get to cancel your contract, just because you failed your training.
Sure. Sure.
So
Sure. Okay.
pretty much I was sitting on a bench for like 2, 3 months waiting for my next assignment. And found out that I was going to be a cavalry scout, which is kind of like the eyes and ears of commander. So we kind of scout the battlefield for other people. But the problem was that when you are a scout, their boot camp and their training are linked together. So then I went back to boot camp for the third time.
All right.
Yeah. So quite the adventure for my first year in the military.
Right. And so, well, I mean, you got it right the third time, am I right?
Yeah, yeah. I passed it and then didn't really like the job, but made some progress.
Yeah. So, well, hey, listen, David Goggins, I think he failed like, I don't know how many times, right? And he's like, he ended up being like a legend as far as passing the damn thing. So, well, that says a whole lot about your resiliency, right? Like your ability to, stay in it, even though you had a contract, right? You didn't have much of a choice. But so, so then once you got in there, right? Like you're struggling with, from what I can gather, some suicidal issues, right? Some serious childhood trauma. And how did that develop? Or at least how did you figure it out or at least start getting some traction and becoming better, right? How did that work out?
Yeah. So there's 2 more, I guess, short stories before we get to the suicidal intent and stuff like that.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, the train isn't
Drop
over
it
yet,
on me.
unfortunately. So, once I got to my first units, I went to Fort Hood, Texas. I got a phone call from my mother, and it was no big deal. She was just checking in how I was doing, and this was like 2 weeks from my birthday. So, when it comes to my mother's story, so around the same time as my father's, so she also had drug and alcohol so she had drug and alcohol issues as well. Sorry about that, stumbling
Yeah.
on words a little bit.
That's all right.
And then she was in even worse living conditions he was. So she didn't have like a job, she didn't have a vehicle, so she couldn't go anywhere. And this went on for like 2 or 3 years. And then I noticed, so her addiction was like pain medication, from what I could
Mm,
tell. So she would like buy it, sell it, trade it. She tried to hide it from me, but I was at that age to where I'm like, I'm not dumb. I can kind of see what you're doing. And then recently I
right.
find out that there might have been like a heroin addiction in there as well.
Right.
So pretty much,
They're not far off, brother, 'cause
yeah.
I was in the opioid crisis as well. And most of the people that I hung around, it just makes sense when you can't afford the pharmaceutical grade heroin, which is what it is. Yeah, you just start doing street heroin, right? So, but you're seeing that develop in her, right? And man, that's a nasty trap. So this phone call a couple of weeks before your birthday.
Yeah. So a couple weeks before my birthday, it was no big deal. She just wanted to check in on me. And what I didn't realize that was actually going to be the last time I was talking to my mother. So this was in processing. So I wasn't even in my unit yet. So next day, got a phone call from the Red Cross. They're like, "Hey, mother's not looking good. You need to come back." And so this is my first experience with the Army after going to boot camp for like a year straight. And so I get back there. Essentially, what they told me is like, she had a bad reaction to like the medication. At this point, she was kind of like off the addiction, and she was like getting her life back on track. So she had a vehicle, she had a job, so she was actually doing really well for herself. So this was actually, all out of the blues, and nothing was expected. So essentially, what happened is the medication had a bad reaction to her brain, and it fried her brain from like the inside out. And so at the same time, I'm also like the eldest son. So when I get there, they're like, "Hey, you're going to be the one that has to make the decision to either keep her on life support or let her go." For religious reasons, I was like, "Hey, I'm going to let her go." But then the nurse walked in at the same time. She's like, "Hey, there's nothing we can do." So like on my way to my first unit, I had to watch my mother die. So, and this is like all consecutive, like the 16 moves, then the father, then the 3 cycles of boot camp, then the mother, and then we finally get to my story.
Yeah.
After all this, a lot of self hatred was going in there, a lot of depression. And so, where my side of the story starts is like, so I lacked a lot of self love. So, when that happened in, I want to say, yeah, it was 2019. I was about 21 at the time. And then I started like looking in for other people. Problem was, I didn't care about who gave it to me. Uh, and so I went to dating websites. I went to like Tinder, stuff like that. Never found anyone genuine. It was all the people who wanted like my money. They were scammers. They're like catfish. And then, but at that time I didn't care. So I was like, if they're talking to me, they give me attention, I would give them their money. I'm like, and I knew
Wow.
they were fake. And
Right.
so what would happen is that like throughout a year, I probably got blackmailed like 7 times throughout that year
Oh my
in
God.
various situations.
Right, man. Wow. So you're set up for failure as far as a relationship is concerned because you're just like, I'll take anything I can get. And you're knowingly participating in scams because you'd rather have the attention from a scam than nothing.
Correct. Yeah.
And when you were blackmailed, and I'll just kind of shed some light. I've done an episode on this show where the guy, it was pretty wild. Like the camera, like he was masturbating on the camera, and they just boom, they just said, "We're gonna send this to your family, and if you don't give us X number of dollars." And now he runs an organization against pornography in general. But that blackmail experience is what pushed him into trying to combat this thing because it's nasty out there. And so when you say you were blackmailed 7 times, I mean, was it something similar to that, or what? I mean, were they jacking your personal information, or how did it look?
Yeah, so throughout the year, so this is there's an entire section of the books. It's like 10 pages long of like I talk about like all the accounts. I don't like mention any names or anything like that. No names in the book. I actually did put David Goggins in the book just because I'm thinking about it because you mentioned it. So he's in there a couple times, along with some other people. Because I think I was watching another one of your podcasts. You mentioned Jordan Peterson, so he's also in there. So I talk about
Yeah.
both of them in the book for like some inspiration. But
Yeah.
essentially how it started was the first one I assume because I can't like confirm most of these accounts. The first one was like a catfish. So they were pretty innocent. They were just, hey, give me money. I'll come see you. Never showed up. Did this like 5 times. I got really desperate until where I like, okay, if you're not going to show up, I'm going to show up to you. So got a city, went to an actual city, got on a bus, went to a hotel, never showed up. Thankfully, they never showed up and they, continued to prevent more excuses. And then like after that, I was done. But once
Okay.
I got done with one of them, I'm like, okay, that didn't work. So let's do it again. So at this point, I was probably into 5 dating sites. I went to, like, every single dating site, and, like, even when I got past those, like, everything was getting rejected, everything like that. Started getting into, like, some of even the worst websites, like the one-star ones. They're like, "Hey, these are all bots and scammers." And so I would continue to go back into the pool, and so the
Yeah.
second time is when I actually got blackmailed. So send a picture to someone, and as soon as like 30 seconds later, they're like, "Hey, here's a picture of your dad and your family. Like, send us money, or we're gonna send it to them." So they got a hold of my like social media, and so they're like, "What do you want to do?" And so, and unfortunately, I continue to go even after that. And so, like, I kept getting worse and worse and worse. And I guess, and then a couple of the scenes get really graphic in the book. So it gets to the point to where, like, this has happened like thousands of dollars throughout the year. Like, my bank account's getting emptied out multiple times. Then we got to a situation where I found a real person. Problem was they wanted money. So I was like, cool, I don't care at this point. I mean, I guess you can call the person like a prostitute at this point. So,
Right.
yeah, hooked up with that person, and then here's where it gets really graphic is that the next day, well, it was like a week later, I ended up getting like chlamydia. So I ended up getting an STD from that. And so I described that experience in the book. I'm like, it's a graphic experience. I don't know if you've ever seen The Green Mile with Tom Hanks, but like
Right. Right.
pretty
Right.
much
Right.
when you're going to the bathroom. So I woke up one morning and went to the bathroom because it was like burning. And I was like, okay, stopped, went back. About 5 minutes later, I was back in the bathroom. 5 minutes later, back in the bathroom. And then I went to work one day. A little bit after that, got to work, and one of my section leaders, he's like, "Oh, you must have been hanging out with the wrong woman," jokingly. And then I'm like, maybe he's onto something in my head. Of course, I didn't say that. And so, kind of passed it off, didn't really tell anyone any of this was going on. And then I go to the bathroom for like the 10th time that day, and I start peeing out like mucus and blood, and I'm like pretty much on my knees and like pain. And so then I had to go to the doctor and then get checked out. Luckily, it is a curable one, so I did get cured of it.
Yeah.
And then, but even that didn't stop me. So I kept going back after that. And so there was one more time after that. And essentially what happened is we started a conversation. They swapped they swapped their ages from their social media to their texting. So they're like, "Hey, I'm 17." I'm like, "I don't care at this point." And let myself get blackmailed again. And they're like, "Hey, so now what you're doing is illegal." And now they got me. And it was that experience that I'm like, could have just like ended any career I could have just ended my life, labeled as a child predator, could have got thrown into jail. And that one was like, when I asked myself, hard question, I was like, do I want to die? And, that question, sprouted in my head for about like a month before I went to go get help. And, that's how we got to like rock bottom.
Yeah, brother. Hold on a second there because what you were saying is that question specifically, it's, do I want to die? And so is this just ringing in your head? That's just kind of like your thought was that like that question? I mean, was it perpetual?
So that kind of like it wasn't like the thought, but it was more of like a thought pattern, I guess, where it's like,
Right.
hey, I hate my life, nothing's going well and I'm 21, 22, haven't been on a single day in my entire life, getting rejected, getting bullied, going through childhood trauma, and like nothing is going well. So I'm like, why do I even want to live at this point? And one of the things I say in the book is like, I would like to live before I die because I'm like, life hasn't been great at this point. So I'm like, it
Okay.
can't get any worse than this.
Right. All right. So, all right. Well, the rock bottom moment
Mhm.
is for you getting to that point, right? Because it's not just one. It's all of this, right? It's all this, which is a horrific string of events and circumstances that you're up against. It's unreal, man. And it would make it makes logical sense that anybody would come to that conclusion of what the hell is the point? Why go forward? But then what I find is interesting is that you just flipped it around. It's like, okay, well, before I call it quits, why don't I give it a shot and try to have some, morsel of actual living before I end it all? So how did that happen? Like how did you manage to get to that place? It's a hell of a lot better than just total hopelessness, right? So how did that work out? Like, I mean, were you praying or what? I mean, how did it happen?
So at this time, it's one of the concepts I talk about a lot, but I was still an atheist all my life up to this point, and you could argue like antichrist. So I was pretty anti-religious up to this point. So I didn't really have any like belief system, and it was just me at this point. And I was always isolated, didn't have a lot of friends, not very strong family ties as you could hear at the time. So I was kind of doing this all alone on myself. I think part of it, like saying getting help, I think part of it was luck. I think, like, if it got reported and if it was, like, real, I think I probably would have ended it there. I kinda, like, let it play out, like, day by day, and then eventually and during this time, I was, like, sneaking off to, like, see INFLEC, which is, like, a military family life counselor, because they don't write anything down, and so I would sneak off, like, during my days, and I would go talk to them, and I didn't let anyone know I was doing these appointments. I'm like, "Hey, I got a medical appointment I gotta go to today." So again, I was doing everything alone and in the side, but one day, it took like a month or two, but I worked up like 30 seconds of courage to say like, "Hey, I'm ready to end my life," and it's like the only thing that these counselors can actually help you with. Because once you say that in the military, like if you want to hurt someone else or yourself, then they have to submit you to hospital. So that's how I got myself into the hospital. Um, and then in the hospital is kind of where things start turning around. So there were two big things I learned at the hospital. So one of them was that not all suicidal people want to end their life. There's actually a large amount of people who want to end their life, but they say they're suicidal. And the reason is like they don't see an out to their situation. And so I think that's kind of what helped me is because I found the outlet. I'm like, hey, I'm going to get help. And then the other
So
one is
I wanna differentiate real quick because I think that you're spot on, and I say this about, like, in my own journey, like, I didn't necessarily wanna die, but I didn't really care if I lived, right? So it was like, I wasn't actively trying to call it quits. I was not trying to end my life. However, I didn't have any in fact, and now that I'm thinking about it, I was very much like in a similar, I guess, category or bucket, if you will, that you're talking about. Like I just didn't see a way out. I couldn't put together any hope, right? But I wasn't fed up enough to like just go ahead and just take my own life. And so that's an interesting differentiation there, man. It really is. And so you say that, and believe me, I know what that's in Florida. Believe me, I understand what that is because they call it a Baker Act. And so if you are a threat or a harm or potential harm to yourself or others, they don't arrest you, even though the cops do it. They put you into a mental hospital. And so I was in that. I really don't even know how many times. I want to say upwards of 15, but I don't really know. So, but I would go in there and it would be a 72-hour hold. Um, now did you know what would happen once you said that, you wanted to take your own life? Did you have an idea where you would end up?
not really. I just knew that I would probably end up in the hospital. But at that point, it's like I didn't really have a choice at that point. I talked about it a little bit. I'm like, before I went to that hospital, I'm like, do you want to live or die at this point? And so I kind of already made my mind up before I went to that hospital
Yeah.
because like I was already at the end. So. And then that's kind of like another question I ask in the book is like, why do you want to live? I mean, not many people like take the time to actually answer that question. I think that's a dangerous question because one day you might be in that situation to where you have to ask that question. You don't have an answer. It's going to be really difficult not to say the other one is like, okay, maybe I just want to die then.
Wow, that is a wildly heavy question.
Yeah.
And this is what you're directing towards the reader, right? You're challenging the reader to figure out why do they want to live? Like what is your, because you have a good point, man. There's so many people that just go through the motions. There's so many people that just they're in a routine. They do it every day. They show up, they go to places, they do the same things. There's not too much of a why. There's not too much of a reason behind any of it. And so they just get caught up in this, circular hamster wheel, if you will, not really ever knowing why they're doing it. And so in your book, you hit rock bottom and you are suicidal, you go to this hospital and you start to learn that maybe you don't really want to die. You just need to figure out how to get unstuck or get out of the circumstances that you're in. How did you do that? I mean, what did the work look like?
Yeah. So I guess the hospital, it didn't really, help me that much, or like some of the counseling that you have to do afterwards, it didn't help me too much. It was like another little pamphlet that I found in the hospital that really changed my mind, which was it said that you could have like a healthy brain, for instance, like, and then, but if you say to yourself that you're depressed, your brain will then make you depressed. And so I took that concept, I reversed it. I'm like, okay, so I know I hate myself. I'm very confident in this. So I'm like, what if I said I was happy? What if I convinced myself I would be happy? And, I kind of pursued that for 3 years until like,
Wow.
I changed my life around. And then where the title of the book comes from is like after I got out of the hospital, I got like a journal and I started writing, answering the hard questions in my life. At the time, I didn't know it was going to turn into a book, like 6 years later. But then, when I recreated the experience recently, that's, kind of where the title comes from.
Yeah, answering the hard questions. So you were wholeheartedly, you were just doing the work on yourself. Now, how would you describe that work? Because I've seen different variations, but I want Devin's interpretation of that work. Like, what did you call that exercise?
So it wasn't really an exercise because it was like I'm just trying to survive at this point, and I'm just trying to change my mind. And I went to some of the counselors, it didn't really work. So I kind of went back to my thing to where I'm like, okay, I'm just going to figure this out by myself. And
Yeah.
so like 2 or 3 appointments in, Well, I got notified that I was going to go on a rotation to Germany pretty soon. And so they're like, hey, we're going to cancel your counseling. They gave me some like antidepressants and stuff like that. So I took them occasionally, but I was like, this isn't really helping. It's just making me tired. And so I actually have the bottle in the next room with me. So it still says 2019. So I still have the entire bottle. And I'm like, I just quit cold turkey on the deployment. And so, but the one thing that kept me going was that one of the questions I asked myself was, and then I guess I should say what an easy question or hard question is. Like an easy question, like you already know the answer, and a hard question requires you to come up with like a better answer that you didn't have before. So requires typically it'll lead to more questions. Typically, it'll make you uncomfortable, and that's where the whole self ability, like self awareness, like you have to be very self aware to like understand some of these concepts. And so the easy question was like, am I happy? Which was a straight no question you can answer in like 5 seconds. Hard question is, well, what would make me happy again? Or like, who would I have to become to make me happy? And so, like, I think I still had like 4 years left on my contract because when I joined the army, I initially signed a 6 year contract. So I knew I had to like implement the army into my contract. So I'm like, all right, maybe I should change my job because as a scout, I didn't really talk about it too much because it's a different chapter of the book. But I was never supposed to be a scout. I found this out recently. So I have glasses on right now. I don't have depth perception. And I got to tell everyone the distance. I got to be good at shooting and then I didn't know this at the time, I just found this out like 2 years ago. And then the other part was like, it was like, you have to have like a combat mindset, and that's never been my personality. So I joined to be a nurse to help people, and now I gotta be the guy almost kinda like infantry in a way. And
Right.
so none of that was adding up. So, like, the career wasn't adding up, family wasn't adding up, dating life wasn't adding up. So I'm like, all right, let me at least change the career. So I kind of made a goal. So I went to a person, well, they're called a career counselor. So it's where they help you look into different jobs, PCSing, and they also do reenlistments. So those are the people that keep people in the army. So I'm like,
Right.
cool, that sounds like a job where I can help people. And so they told
Now
me a couple of the
now
requirements.
you were okay with being in the military, it was just that the job in the military was the bad piece to all of this.
I would say I hated the army for a very long time because of my basic training cycle, because of failing out, because of, being put in a job I didn't want to be in. So I had a lot of hatred for the army at first. And then, kind of when I got out of that hospital, I was really hoping that they would discharge me when I said I'm suicidal. It didn't happen. They wanted to keep me in because I was a good soldier.
Huh. Yeah, so that's why I had asked you, like, where did you think you were going to end up? And you just answered it. Is that you thought that they were gonna get you right out of there. And maybe if they had, you would have came through on that, you know, that question. And maybe who knows? Maybe that's what was maybe God just moved that chess piece there for you. But
Oh, yeah,
so
yeah, that is. Oh, yeah, that's good. Go ahead.
no, no, no. Have at it,
I
brother.
was gonna say, so that was another part of the book where I actually do acknowledge that. I'm like, I'm glad I stayed in because that was another 5 years added. And so what essentially happened is like I looked at what a career counselor was. I'm like, cool, I got to talk to soldiers, and then which I didn't like talking to people at this point. I was very self isolated, and so I also had to be optimistic because I'm trying to sell the army. So I also had to get rid of my self hatred for the army, and so I pretty much had to create like a new character at that point. And I kind of like used that goal because I was like, looked at the requirements. I had to be like a sergeant promotable at the time, which was I was going to get by the end of the deployment. And then I also had to go to like some darts training, and that was about it. So I'm like, cool, I can go on this deployment. And by the end of the deployment, I can kind of like get my life back and go in like a different direction. And so that's kind of how I used to become more optimistic. So I would go talk to soldiers on my spare time and then like focus on other things. And so that's kind of like where it started.
Well, so I can see two really great tools that you're implementing. One is, and that's why I'd asked you what you would label it, is because I've used different forms or variations of it. Linguistic programming, NLP, right? So that's if you could tell yourself you're depressed and you become depressed, you could also tell yourself that you're happy and you could become happy. So that's the NLP application, and so this is where sometimes people get that confused with say affirmations and things of that nature. But when you start to attach your identity to it, and then it can have a different effect. And then the other tool that I can see that you're using is that you are setting your sights on who you want in your mind is like who you had to become in order to get the role. And so you are changing who you are, your physiology, your mental outlook by being more optimistic and more favorable of the military. Like you are creating a different person. And maybe it isn't so much so for your own well-being, but you're doing it to get a particular role. Nonetheless, that tool of character creation is wildly important. And we all do it. We all do it all the time. So why the hell not do it for to be somebody better and cooler and not depressed? Like it is 100% achievable. And you're telling me that you did it. So I think that that's pretty cool, man. Is that you're doing both of those things, but you also aren't recognizing that that's like. How about this? Did you develop in your book like your own framework or your own approach to all these things? Or maybe like a culmination of all these different approaches?
Yeah, so pretty much what happened is like I made that goal, went on to the deployment, and then and that 1 year goal ended up being a 3 year goal. I had some other misfortunes happen along the way, so all the tribulations didn't end yet. So, for example, like when the closer on deployments, we're very close with people in the army because right, you're sleeping with these people, right? There's like 40 people in one room. You're all together. It's all about camaraderie and like teamwork and stuff like that. Towards the end of that deployment, I knew I was still single, so I'm like, hey, I'm about to go home alone. And so it was kind of like those old feelings, I reinstalled the dating apps, stuff like that. And then something that also happened at that time is like towards the end of deployment, I went to go get my promotable status so I could drop my packet for being a career counselor. I got with my first sergeant at the time, who was my leadership, because I was a training room at the time. So I got to see all the books and the records for people who were going to get a promotable status, get to go to the board and stuff like that. And he put a no next to my name. I'm like, hold up, we've been talking for this about this goal for like a year, and you just marked no. He's like, "Yeah, I meant to tell you about that." So we have a conversation. He's like, "I'm going to recommend you no because you haven't been a scout now." So he's like, "Because we took you away from the scout platoon, I'm not going to count any of your time." I'm like, "I'm not trying to stay a scout. I'm trying to move on and reclass." And so he's like, "No." So I got notified. I'm like, "Hey, you're going back to the scout platoon. I'm not giving you a promotable status." So like I'm back to the dating websites. The 1 year goal I just made got pushed to the right by a huge margin. And so now I'm
Wow.
like, I just took a lap and I'm in the same place again.
Damn, brother.
And then,
No,
so
but
I
you
guess
also mentioned that you're back on the dating sites, right? So is that like when pain starts to hit you, you're like, shit, I need some kind of attention from somebody, and then you would get into that. Is that what you would kind of like hide in?
in some form, yeah, because it's like I don't want to feel like this loneliness or like I didn't get hooked on like a substance, but I got hooked on like the desperation or the rejection, something like that, somewhere along those lines. It This time it ended up helping me in this odd situation. So even though like I reinstalled all the dating apps, so we got back from the deployment, I'm like almost kind of like back at rock bottom again. One thing though was I had to move outside the barracks, and so I had to get my apartment and I had to get a vehicle for the first time, and so the army actually messed up my money, so I wasn't getting paid right for 2 months. So I had a whole $5 like left in my bank account, so I had to get rid of all the dating apps and stuff like that. And then eventually I just got rid of all the subscriptions, everything like that, because I'm like, I can't afford to do this anymore. So that kind of helped me get off. There was one more situation, but and this helped me a lot in my story. I got into the situation where they tried to do the age scam again. And so they tried to do it, but I recognized the patterns from last time. I'm like, hold up, this is the exact same pattern they used last time. And so I recognized three different patterns and I just called them out. I'm like, hey, I did nothing wrong. I blocked the person. I took notes. I did everything right this time. You have nothing on me. And I'm like, if you threaten me again, I'm going to actually make an investigation. And then so that kind of gave me a lot of peace of mind because I'm like, what if this thing happened like 3 years ago? Well, this now it looks like it's not real at all. And so that kind of, gave my mind some rest. And then
Yeah.
on the other end, the career counselor. So when I got back from that deployment, there was like a little, it's called retention into all the year. It's where a competition to where you can go and get a career counselor slot if you pass the board. So I went to that board as well. I was the only soldier like in the entire division of like, that's like 10,000 people, and I was the only one to attend. So I'm like, I just had to pass. And so they're
Nice.
like, "Hey, we love it. We're going to submit your packet right away." And then so, I killed two birds with one stone within like a month or two. And that was kind of like the final. And then when I got to the class later that year, I'm like, "Okay, we just made it through. We just beat all these obstacles. We just made the goal come true. We just changed my entire personality over the last 3 years." And I'm like, so this was 2022, and I'm like, "Okay, so I have a story to tell now." I didn't write the story until like 2025, but I'm like, maybe I'm onto something.
Okay, yeah, and so yeah, and that even that journaling, right? The questions that you're asking yourself and fleshing it out, and all of that, and believe me, I agree with you, man. You 100% have a story to tell. I'm glad you did it. I'm glad you put it into a book, and it includes those questions that you start asking yourself, hence the name of the book, and so awesome. It's awesome, and so what that's why we're speaking is because we want eyeballs on your book. However, I don't know. Do you have it? Is it on deck for being launched? I mean, where are we at with this thing?
So it launches March 31st. And so I already have some of the copies of the book. It's been out, sent to some readers and like reviewers. We also did like a giveaway like on Goodreads.
Yeah,
And then we're also doing like a discount sale for like Kindle. So it's like 99 cents right now on Kindle. And then it's also in paperback. It'll also be in like
well,
hardcover.
you got one. Hold this thing up. What the hell? What's going on?
So I actually got it
There
right
we go.
here.
Hold it back a little bit more. Oh, wait, now that's right there. There it is. Awesome, man.
Yep.
Awesome. I'm a
Yep.
huge fan of authors. That's pretty well done, brother. Awesome.
Yeah.
Now,
They did a great job.
yeah, yeah. And how was the process of writing it? How do you feel about that?
This is, I guess, where some of the story gets a little more crazier. But everything that's kind of happened was like just another chapter to be added to the book, which is I'm really thankful for. So I was on a deployment in 20. Well, yeah. So 2025, I started this book. I got notified on a deployment. Well, I guess I should back it up a little bit further than that. So originally, I put this in a PowerPoint, and I was going to present it to some of my peers. PowerPoint got rejected. Then I got notified I was going to deployment. So I went on deployment. I'm like, cool. But I wanted to present the story. So I'm like, I'm going to make this into a book now. So started that deployment in Kuwait, started making the book. And then 10 pages in, I'm like, it was number 10. Yeah. So it was 10 pages in, and I wrote the end of the book. So I didn't start at the beginning. I started at the end, and I'm like, I'm going to make this entire book about this one concept at the end of the book. And at that time, only 10 pages in, it's like, I think it's 287 for like the paperback. And I was like, hey, I'm going to leave the army so I can go write this book. And then when the book launches, then I can ETS and I'm going to go chase this dream. And so that's what I did. And, it took a lot of faith, and I even talk about it, but because in my army career right now, like I'm 10 years in, I could retire in 10 years. I have a K salary right now. And so, like, I have all this stability in the world, but I'm like, I'm just going to go write this book. I'm going to go tell the story and do my own thing. And then everything kind of led up to making that. And then, essentially how the book started being made is I didn't write it like a typical book. So when I talked about like the background, I talked about my mother, my father, and the blackmailing. So that's all chapter one. And there's 14 chapters to the book. Some of the chapters I go more in depth, and then like around chapter 5 is where I start talking about like the comeback and stuff like that. But it's really split into 3 different books. So there is like the part where I ask the readers questions. And so at the end of those smaller segments, there's like a question. So there's like 100 questions for the reader. And then those questions are at the end of the book as well, to where they have their own journal. And at the beginning of each chapter, that's where the memoir is. And
I
so,
love it.
really, it was a bunch of fragmented pieces. And then I put the book together after that.
That's how you get it done, brother. That is sensational. And so March 31st, this book is out and is ready to rock. And so that's phenomenal, my brother. And so I'm excited to promote you, and I'm getting on board, not because of this particular podcast, but just because I'm a huge fan of authors. And so, yeah, good on you. And so where now this show it'll be published after the 31st, just so you know. So where are people going to go? Is it on Amazon? Do you have a website? How do they get in touch with you? What does that look like?
Yeah, so it will be on Amazon. It'll also be on Kindle, like iBook, stuff like that. It'll also be online for like Barnes and Noble. If they want to display it, they can. So those are the basic ones. And then again, it can be ordered in an ebook, paperback, and then hardcover. As far as my social media, I don't like have like a big social media right now. I just made my stuff like public like after I made the book because I'm like, okay, can't really hide my social media anymore. So like after 6 years, I made it like unprivate again after my stuff
Yeah.
got leaked. So really, I've just been posting a lot about there. There's been a lot of changes in the last 5 months.
Yeah, man. I got you back. And so what I'll do is I'll put everything in black and white for everybody to check out. But yeah, go check out my boy Devin Fish. He is a patriot. He's a comeback story, that's for sure, right? And man, your journey is one of resilience and it's most certainly impressive and inspirational, man. And so I'm so glad that you're shouting it from the rooftops and doing it in a written form. And so, yeah, man, I appreciate your time. And that's been another episode of The Next Fix.